The year is 1979. Tehran echoes with the roar of a million voices. The air crackles with anticipation and fear. A sea of humanity floods the streets, united in defiance. This is Iran, on the precipice of a revolution that will shake the world. The Shah, once seemingly invincible, teeters on the brink. His grip on power, weakened by years of discontent, is about to shatter. From the ashes of the old order, a new Iran will emerge. An Islamic republic led by a charismatic cleric exiled for 15 years, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. The Iranian Revolution would not merely topple a monarch, it would redraw the geopolitical map of the Middle East. Its shockwaves would be felt across the globe, leaving an indelible mark on the relationship between Islam and the West. This is the story of a revolution foretold, a conflagration ignited by a potent mix of social unrest, economic inequality, and political repression. It's a story of foreign interference and domestic dissent, of a leader who lost touch with his people, and a revolution that gave voice to their frustrations. Mohammedrezashah Pahlavi, crowned in 1941, dreamt of transforming Iran into a modern, industrialized nation. His dream of a great civilization in Iran led to his leadership over a series of ambitious modernization projects, fueled by the country's vast oil wealth, into sectors not limited to industrial, military, economic and social sectors. Skyscrapers rose in Tehran, factories churned out goods, universities opened their doors to a new generation. But beneath this veneer of progress, a deep well of resentment was brewing. The Shah's reforms, often implemented with an iron fist, alienated large segments of society. His close ties to the West, particularly the United States, were seen by many as a betrayal of Iranian sovereignty. The Shah's autocratic rule stifled dissent. His secret police, the Savak, ruthlessly crushed any opposition. The economic boom, fueled by oil, exacerbated social inequalities. While a select few prospered, the majority of Iranians struggled with poverty and unemployment. The gap between rich and poor widened into a chasm, fueling resentment and anger towards the Shah and his regime. The stage was set for a revolution. The question was not if, but when. Under Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi's rule, Iran experienced significant economic growth and modernization. From 1962 to 1970, the country's gross national product, GNP, rose by 8% annually, and this growth accelerated with increases of 14% from 1972 to 1973 and a remarkable 30% from 1973 to 1974. These gains were fueled substantial investments in infrastructure, private enterprises, and state budgets. The Shah's policies aimed to transform Iran into a modern, industrialized state, reflecting an era of economic prosperity and Western alignment. However, despite these early successes, the Shah's ambitious modernization plans faced substantial challenges and ultimately contributed to widespread discontent. The White Revolution, launched to further modernize Iran and its institutions, included land reforms intended to redistribute agricultural wealth and update rural life. Yet these reforms, while revolutionary in intent, faltered in execution and impact. Initially, the reforms aimed to dismantle large landholdings of traditional landlords and redistribute land to tenant farmers. However, this well-intentioned plan overlooked the integral role that these landowners played in the agricultural ecosystem. Without a replacement system to manage land and support tenant farmers, many of the redistributed lands fell into disuse. By the late 1970s, estimates suggest that approximately 40% of the redistributed land was abandoned or underutilized. Rural wage earners and nomads, displaced by the reforms, found themselves uprooted and compelled to migrate to urban areas in search of livelihoods, further straining the cities. The Shah's efforts to modernize the economy also faced significant resistance. The 1973 OPEC oil price hikes had profound implications for Iran, significantly contributing to the economic instability that triggered the Iranian Revolution. Encouraged by a surge in oil revenues, the Shah embarked on an ambitious economic development plan, including a $32.5 billion five-year initiative aimed at achieving an annual growth rate of 11.4%. Initially, the increase in oil prices quadrupled Iran's oil revenues, but the subsequent volatility exposed the fragility of Iran's economic state. When global oil prices began to fluctuate, Iran's revenues became increasingly unstable, leading to a fiscal crisis by 1977. As of 1976, the cost of living index had nearly doubled, and essentials like food and housing saw even steeper price increases. Several factors contributed to this inflation, including a shortage of housing, the influx of well-paid foreign technicians, stagnating agricultural production, rising global food prices, aggressive industrialization, and significant military expansion. These issues were exacerbated by the government's rapid increase in development investments and money supply. In response, the Shah's regime blamed the business community, initiating an anti-profiteering campaign that targeted both large and small businesses. This campaign included strict price controls and the importation of basic commodities to undercut local dealers. Vigilante teams were organized to enforce these measures, resulting in widespread fines, bans, and prison sentences for many traders. One notable example of the Shah's disastrous economic program was his rice importation policy. The Shah, desiring higher quality rice, began to subsidize American and European imports, making them cheaper than Iranian rice. This led to many Iranian farmers going out of business. In a similar vein, Iran extended diplomatic immunity to all Americans as part of the forced law in 1965, and subsequently received a $200 million loan from the United States, nearly $2 billion as of 2024. Khomeini highlighted public outrage by describing pro-Western efforts with biting criticism. If someone runs over a dog belonging to an American, he will be prosecuted. Even if the Shah himself were to run over a dog belonging to an American, he would be prosecuted. But if an American cook runs over the Shah, the head of state, no one will have the right to interfere with him. The Shah's aggressive modernization policies exacerbated social inequalities. The neglect of rural areas and disruption of traditional economic systems created a growing disenfranchised population. By the late 1970s, rural unemployment had risen to around 15%, and urban migration increased significantly, with an estimated 1.5 million people moving from rural areas to cities in just a few years. This discontent was particularly evident among the rural poor and small landowners, who, along with disaffected middle-class groups, increasingly turned to the clergy for support. The Shah's approach to modernization was compounded by a complex relationship with the religious faction. Despite his westernizing ambitions, the Shah relied heavily on the clergy as a political base, permitting them to build religious institutions and run schools. His secularization policies, however, clashed with the deeply religious fabric of Iranian society, which had been marginalized since his father's era. By 1978, there were approximately 1,000 religious schools across Iran, up from 500 in 1960, reflecting the growing influence of the clergy. The clergy, which had been empowered as the primary organized political force due to the Shah's policies, grew in influence and became a formidable opponent. As the revolution gained momentum, the clergy, particularly under the leadership of Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, capitalized on the widespread discontent. The Shah's attempts to maintain his power by allying with lesser clerics such as Ayatollah Ahmad Kansari and Ayatollah Kazem Shariat Madari proved insufficient. Khomeini's strong and charismatic leadership, coupled with the clergy's organized resistance, positioned them as the natural leaders of the revolutionary movement. The Shah's failure to address the deep-rooted grievances of various societal segments, coupled with his reliance on a flawed vision of modernization, set the stage for the dramatic upheaval that would follow. As the revolutionary tide swelled, the absence of effective countermeasures and viable political alternatives left the Shah vulnerable and unable to stave off the impending revolution. The Iranian Revolution was not simply a domestic affair. It played out against a backdrop of Cold War tensions and superpower rivalry. For the United States, Iran under the Shah was a crucial ally in a volatile region. It provided a bulwark against Soviet influence in the Middle East and served as a vital source of oil. The United States, through the CIA, had played a pivotal role in orchestrating the 1953 coup that had restored the Shah to power after he was briefly deposed. This history of intervention cast a long shadow over U.S. Iran relations and fueled accusations of neo-colonialism. Adding fuel to the fire was the Anglo-Persian Oil Company, later renamed British Petroleum. This British-controlled company held a monopoly over Iran's oil industry, extracting vast profits while ordinary Iranians saw little benefit. Resentment against APOC ran deep, seen as a symbol of Western exploitation. The company's presence became a rallying cry for nationalists and revolutionaries alike. As discontent with the Shah's regime grew, so too did the influence of a charismatic religious leader, Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini. Forced into exile in 1964 for his outspoken criticism of the Shah, Khomeini continued to rally opposition from afar. From his base in Najaf, Iraq, he disseminated his message through smuggled cassette tapes, calling for the overthrow of the Shah and the establishment of an Islamic Republic. A pivotal moment in the revolution came in August 1978, when a fire engulfed the Cinema Rex Theatre in Abadan, killing hundreds of people. The regime blamed Islamic militants, but the opposition accused the Shah's Savak of orchestrating the fire to frame its enemies. The Cinema Rex fire, organized by Khomeini's own religious faction, marked a turning point. It shattered the image of the Shah's regime as a source of stability and order. The flames of Abadan ignited a wildfire of anger and resentment across Iran, propelling the revolution into a new, more volatile phase. From his exile in Najaf, Khomeini's pronouncements crackled over shortwave radios in Iranian bazaars and homes. He denounced the Shah as a puppet of the West, a tyrant who had betrayed Islam and oppressed his people. Khomeini's message resonated deeply with Iranians from all walks of life. Students disillusioned by the lack of political freedom, workers struggling to make ends meet, and devout Muslims angered by what they saw as the Shah's assault on traditional values. Khomeini's charisma and his message of Islamic revolution galvanized the opposition. He provided a unifying ideology, rallying disparate groups under the banner of Islam. Khomeini skillfully wove together religious and nationalist sentiments, portraying the revolution as a struggle against both the Shah's tyranny and Western imperialism. His call to action transformed a groundswell of discontent into a roaring torrent of revolutionary fervor. At just the wrong time, the Shah's lymphoma condition, diagnosed in 1975, began to worsen heavily. Thus, the state's heavy centralization around him did little favors in helping him secure the regime. The Shah, in a desperate attempt to quell the rising tide of opposition, implemented a series of reforms. He granted women the right to vote, seeking to project a more modern and progressive image. He even briefly loosened restrictions on political dissent, allowing for limited freedom of expression. These efforts, however, proved too little, too late. The reforms were seen as superficial, a desperate attempt to cling to power. The Shah's modernization drive had alienated powerful segments of society, including the clergy, who saw their traditional authority undermined by the Shah's secularizing reforms. The Shah's attempts to modernize Iran had, ironically, hastened his downfall. By alienating both traditionalists and reformers, he had united them in their opposition to his rule. The Shah's troubles began with a major shift in U.S. leadership. Richard Nixon, a staunch ally of the Shah, was succeeded by Gerald Ford in 1974. Ford's administration was less supportive and concerned about human rights abuses in Iran, as was much of Congress. The status quo became more pronounced under Jimmy Carter, whose presidency was marked by an emphasis on human rights and democracy. Carter's approach weakened American support for the Shah at a time when he was most vulnerable. America's focus has shifted to pressing issues such as SALT II negotiations and the Israel-Egypt peace treaty. As a result, the Iranian Revolution did not receive the attention or support that might have altered its trajectory. One critical factor in the Shah's downfall was a significant intelligence lapse. The US intelligence community, fixated on Soviet influence, neglected to gather essentials on the ground on Iran's internal dynamics. This gap became apparent as protests and economic developments escalated. American diplomatic reporting also suffered from severe misjudgments. William Sullivan, the US ambassador to Iran, consistently failed to report the Shah's deteriorating mental state. Despite daily meetings with the Shah, Sullivan assured Secretary of State Cyrus Vance that the situation was under control, even as reports suggested otherwise. Sullivan's fear of losing control of the operation in Iran contributed to his reluctance to fully disclose the Shah's condition. Additionally, the Shah was suspicious of American contacts with opposition groups, leading US intelligence to scale back even basic intelligence collection. SAVAK, the Shah's secret police, was meant to substitute for an actual US intelligence presence, but failed to provide critical information about opposition groups. The reaction to the crisis also played a role in the fall of the Pahlavi dynasty. The Shah adopted liberalization measures, including First Amendment rights, pressed on in large part by the Carter administration. These measures were not fully understood by the Iranian population and were exploited by the opposition. Protesters, encouraged to exercise their rights, engaged in actions like setting fire to government buildings and attacking police and soldiers. Media coverage, influenced by opposition narratives and reports of human rights abuses, exaggerated the situation and negatively impacted Iranian public opinion. The Shah faced a difficult choice: adhere to a strict doctrine to handle the protests and risk accusations of hypocrisy, or stand by and risk losing control of the country. Opting for the latter, he lost the chance to use his well-trained military to quell the protests. The Iranian Revolution sent shockwaves across the globe. It toppled a US-backed monarch and replaced him with an Islamic republic, fundamentally altering the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East. The revolution inspired Islamist movements worldwide, demonstrating the potential power of political Islam. The revolution also ushered in an era of heightened tensions between the Western world, chiefly the United States and Israel, against Iran, a stage set in particular by the Iranian hostage crisis. This hostage crisis, in which Iranian students held 52 American diplomats and citizens hostage for 444 days, poisoned relations between the two countries. Up until that point, there had remained chances of coexistence between the two nations, as noted by secret correspondence by Carter and Khomeini. The Iranian hostage crisis began on November 4, 1979, when Iranian militants stormed the US embassy in Tehran, seizing 52 American diplomats and citizens. The seizure was a dramatic response to the US government's decision to allow the exiled Shah of Iran to enter the United States for medical treatment. The militants, who viewed the Shah as a symbol of Western interference and corruption, demanded his return to stand trial in Iran. The hostage situation swiftly became a critical issue for President Jimmy Carter, whose administration faced mounting pressure both domestically and internationally. The early days of the crisis were marked by failed negotiations and escalating tensions. Diplomatic efforts to secure the hostages' release proved fruitless as the US government struggled with Iran's uncompromising demands and the deteriorating situation in Tehran. As months passed, the frustration and urgency reached a peak, leading to the planning of a high-risk military intervention. This intense pressure to resolve the crisis, coupled with a desire to restore American prestige, set the stage for Operation Eagle Claw. Operation Eagle Claw was a desperate and daring attempt by the Carter administration to resolve the Iranian hostage crisis. Launched in April 1980, the mission aimed to rescue 52 American hostages held by Iranian militants in Tehran. It was a complex, multi-phase operation that required precise coordination and involved elite Delta Force soldiers at its core. The operation began with US aircraft covertly entering Iranian airspace, landing at a remote desert site known as Desert One. However, extreme weather conditions, including blinding sandstorms, led to mechanical failures and communication breakdowns. As helicopters and transport planes prepared for the next phase, disaster struck. Two aircraft collided, resulting in a fiery explosion, that claimed the lives of 8 servicemen and forced the mission to be aborted. The failure of Operation Eagle Claw shocked the nation. Despite meticulous planning, the mission's collapse in the Iranian desert dashed hopes for a swift resolution to the crisis. The failure not only shook American confidence, but also had significant political repercussions, contributing to President Carter's loss in the 1980 election and prompting a major overhaul of U.S. Special Operations Forces. Iran's decision to release the American hostages on January 20th, 1981, the very day Ronald Reagan was inaugurated as president, was a calculated move to embarrass and undermine the outgoing Carter administration. This timing was no coincidence. It served as a final blow to Carter, whose presidency had been overshadowed by the hostage crisis. For 444 days, 52 American diplomats and citizens were held captive in Tehran, a situation that gripped the nation and highlighted the vulnerability of American power on the global stage. The prolonged crisis became emblematic of Carter's struggles in foreign policy, and his inability to secure the hostages' release was seen by many as a failure of his leadership. Despite intense diplomatic efforts and the ill-fated military attempt with Operation Eagle Claw, Carter could not bring the hostages home during his time in office. The release of the hostages mere minutes after Reagan's inauguration was a strategic act by Iran, signaling a shift in their approach to U.S. relations and delivering a public relations blow to Carter. The hostage crisis was a watershed moment in U.S.-Iran relations. It solidified the image of the United States as the great Satan in the eyes of many Iranians and fueled anti-American sentiment across the Muslim world. The United States, in turn, viewed Iran as a rogue state, a sponsor of terrorism, and a threat to regional stability. The ensuing decades have been marked by a cycle of confrontation and mistrust. Sanctions, threats, and proxy conflicts have characterized the relationship, hindering any prospect of meaningful dialogue or cooperation. The Iranian Revolution's legacy continues to cast a long shadow over U.S. foreign policy in the Middle East. 45 years after the revolution, Iran remains a country of contradictions. It is a regional power with a proud history and a rich culture. Yet it is also a country grappling with international isolation and economic hardship. The revolution's legacy continues to shape Iran's domestic and foreign policy, influencing everything from social mores to nuclear ambitions. The Iranian Revolution was a pivotal event, not just for Iran, but for the world. It underscored the potent appeal of political Islam, reshaped the geopolitical landscape of the Middle East, and triggered a seismic shift in U.S.-Iran relations. The revolution's echoes continue to reverberate today, a stark reminder of the enduring power of ideas, the complexities of revolution, and the challenges of building a lasting peace in a volatile region.